One of the things I learned from reading Solzhenitsyn is he talked about his moral transformation in the camps. And he said the first thing that transformed him to some degree was looking at people in the camps who did refuse to do immoral things no matter what. He said he ran into people like that, and that just blew him away. Because you already laid that out. It's like, he said they were continually choosing between their life and their conscience. And they chose their conscience. Like, and he tells some amazing stories in the Gulag Archipelago about, you know, dozens of people he met like that. And they're stories that of heroism, moral heroism under absolutely vicious conditions. You just can't believe them, you know. So that's pretty amazing. But he said that once he kind of figured out that there was a difference between attending to your conscience and doing whatever was necessary to prolong your miserable existence, that he started to think about that deeply, and that he went over his life with a fine-tooth comb and tried to figure out everything he did that he knew was wrong. And then to try to figure out what he could do in the present to rectify that. You know, you wouldn't necessarily be able to atone. That's the right way of thinking about it. You know, you do something wrong, and well, maybe you can't even fix it with the person you did the wrong to, but maybe there's something else you could do that would be good enough so that, you know, you can think, okay, well, at least those balance out, and maybe I'm a little bit on the side of the positive. So he did that, you know, and that, he said that straightened him out a lot. And then he wrote this book, this amazing book that, you know, cut the communist intellectuals off at their knees and changed the world, really. And that's a hell of a thing for someone to do who's a, you know, miserable Zek in a concentration camp. That's a hell of a story, man. And it's not the only one like it. So you don't know how much power you have where you stand, even if you look weak, and if what's around you is terrible, well, then you've got lots of things to do, that's for sure. And they're announcing themselves right there. So, and it's tying it in with evil and suffering that is best for me, because it's so real. You know, it's like you can be skeptical about the existence of the good. But if you open your eyes and you do any amount of studying and even any amount of self-examination, you can't be skeptical about the existence of evil. I don't believe that you can. There are things that, read about Unit 731 and then see how skeptical you are about evil. I wouldn't recommend that, by the way, because that is so horrible that you can't really read it without being traumatized. It is unbelievably horrible. You read that, and then you say, well, morality is relative. It's like, see if you can utter those words after reading that. And then if morality isn't relative and there is evil, then there is good. It's at least whatever isn't evil, right? Whatever doesn't cause that is good. It's sort of defining it by its opposite, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. It's good enough.
And so how do guys, going back to the PTSD conversation a little bit, how do guys that sort of experienced this evil part of not only of the world but of themselves, because they had to do some things that they didn't want to do or they didn't like doing, and things that made them feel like there's a dark part of me that I don't really like too much. What's the you know, from what I've said is you got to embrace that the fact that there's darkness in the world and that there's darkness in you got to embrace that and get a hold of it, not try and disguise it, not try and make it seem like it's not there. That's the same thing you're saying, right? Yeah, well, you know, when you're in really, they say there's no atheists in foxholes, you know, and that's you know, it's a bit of a cliche, but there's a deep truth in that, which is there's some circumstances that you find yourself in for which only religious language works. And if you happen to observe yourself doing something that's heinous enough to damage you psychologically, then you're in the realm of good and evil, archetypal good and evil. And unless you can start to conceptualize the world in that manner, you're never going to make sense out of it. And so partly it depersonalizes it. You know, it's you that did this. But it's like the capacity for evil isn't just you. It's part of humanity. Maybe it's part of the structure of the cosmos, and you happen to stumble over it naively, and so it hurt you. You know, there's this old Egyptian story about a god named Horus, and he's the god of attention. So he's represented by the Egyptian eye, so he pays attention. He's also a falcon, and falcon has great vision and flies above everything, right? And he's also the
the force that revitalizes the dead father in Egyptian mythology. But he has a fight with his evil uncle, Set, who's a precursor to the idea of Satan. And then you can tell partly because the words are quite similar. And he has a terrible battle with Set, who's taken over the kingdom and is a terrible tyrant and is killing everyone, and everything's going to hell. And he has a battle with him to regain control of his kingdom. And that's fine, and he's a god. And so is Seth. And they have a fight, and it's a terrible fight. And during the fight, Seth tears out one of his eyes. When you think, well, that's a god, right? And nonetheless, he ends up with his vision damaged, his consciousness damaged. Now, he gains a different kind of sight. He gains insight, right? Because now he knows the nature of evil, but he pays a big price for it. And so you think, well, if that's the case for a god, how much more is it the case for a man to be damaged? It's like absolutely right. It's no joke to encounter malevolence. You know, I've seen that in my clinical clients too. I had a client who was terrified into nightly convulsions for 4 years by the look on her boyfriend's face when he attacked her. It took me a long time to unpack that. It was like a 3-month process. But see, she was very naive, very, very, very naive, because her parents had raised her in a world where the evil queen was not allowed to visit, like the parents in Sleeping Beauty. So she was way too sheltered. And she thought that human beings were only good, you know, and then she saw the look on his face that indicated that he was out to consciously harm her. And he couldn't. They had a fight, a physical fight, and she was strong enough to prevail. He wasn't that big. But that wasn't the point. It shattered her world, because she didn't understand until that point that someone could actually consciously want to hurt you. You know, that wasn't just, they weren't just in a bad mood, and it wasn't just because of the way they were raised, and, you know, all those excuses that people come up, that he was not only going to hurt her, but he was going to enjoy it. And if you don't understand the part of you that's capable of that, then, well, you're dangerously naive, and dangerous as well, because you don't know what you're capable of.